It's sheer madness, Laura. With all these policemen about. What do I care about the police? The more the better. I suppose you know what you are doing? Didn't you know what you were doing, all these months? And today? For God's sake, Laura. What do you mean? But she did not reply to that, and the next moment they had passed by our porch, going as nearly as I could determine toward the Lancaster house itself, and leaving me there on the porch with the solid foundations of the crescent fairly rocking under my feet. What had driven them into speech together I had no idea, but from the cold fury in her voice and the fear in his I knew that it was something terrific, something beyond any knowledge of mine. I had never doubted that they were on the way to the Lancaster house, now only dimly lighted. To my amazement, however, the next thing I saw was that the flash was being used in the woodshed. Mrs. Dalton was apparently examining it from roof to floor, and by going down to the end of our garden I saw that this was so. It gave me a strange and eerie feeling, for now again they were not talking. He was standing in the open doorway, and she seemed to be moving about rapidly. Luckily for them, for she seemed beyond caution, the doorway opened in our direction and there were no windows. Also the rain had apparently driven the outside searchers within doors somewhere. It had stopped raining by that time, but the grass and shrubbery were dripping, and I began to feel cold and uneasy. In the Lancaster house Margaret's windows at the back, which had been dark, were suddenly lighted. Evidently she, too, could not sleep. And in the shed I heard Mr. Dalton's voice, now cold and angry. Well, what have you found? I know what I'm after. That's something. I think you've gone crazy. Then what about you? Ask yourself that. And I'll find them, don't worry. You're clever, Brian, but I'm clever too. Wherever you put them I'll find them. That broke his icy calm, for he went in suddenly and caught her by the shoulder. No, you won't, he said. I'll tell you that right now. Then he released her and his voice softened somewhat. You're a little thing to have so much hate in you, he said. If you'd been any sort of wife to me, Laura. And whose fault was that? Sheer recklessness had carried them safely through all this. I know now that there was a policeman on the Lancaster back porch at the time, but as I have said the woodshed is at some distance, and is screened by shrubbery as well. Not that Mrs. Dalton cared, at that. She was in one of those cold rages where she cared nothing for consequences. This was evident when she started back with the flash still going. I had beat a hasty retreat, but I could hear him protesting. "For God's sake, Laura. Do you want us both arrested?" They couldn't hold me. Not for a minute. But she put out the light, and as they passed our porch again they were only two shadowy figures once more, silent and unhappy. I had a feeling of tragedy about them that night, for their frustrated lives and their wasted years. It was not until I was back in my room and in my bed that the full significance of that visit and that conversation began to dawn on me. Surely Laura Dalton could not suspect her husband of that ghastly murder. What possible motive could he have had? The money? But according to the inspector, the money was still in the chest. Chapter 11. Mother had one of her headaches the next morning, and I was awakened late with the word that George Talbot wanted to see me downstairs. I dressed as quickly as possible, and George came into the dining room while I ate my breakfast. The Crescent frowns on meals in bed except in case of illness. I sent Annie out as soon as possible, although I had an uneasy feeling that she was not far from the pantry door. George looked tired and anxious. "See here, Lou," he said. "I suppose you know that Jim is in pretty bad with the police, although they've released him."